Mr. Speaker, I very much welcome the opportunity to update Parliament and the country on the economic challenges we face and our plan to tackle them. My message to honourable members on all sides of the House is simply this. We must not shy away from the burden of responsibility to take decisions and to lead. We must do this with honesty and cooperation. We cannot allow the virus to take hold. We must prevent the strain on our NHS becoming unbearable. But we must also acknowledge the stark reality of the economic and social impacts of another national lockdown. The costs of doing so are not abstract, they are real. They can be counted in jobs lost, businesses closed, and children's educations harmed. They can be measured in the permanent damage done to our economy, which will undermine our long-term ability to fund our NHS and our valued public services. And they can be measured in the increase in long-term health conditions that unemployment causes. This is not about choosing one side or the other. It is not about taking decisions because they are popular. It is not about health versus wealth or any other simplistic lens we choose to view this moment through. The Prime Minister was absolutely right when he set out our desire for a balanced approach, taking the difficult decisions to save lives and keep the R rate down while doing everything in our power to protect the jobs and livelihoods of the British people. And the evidence shows a regional, tiered approach is right because it prevents rushing to another lockdown the entire country would suffer, rather than targeting that support, preventing a lockdown in parts of the country where the virus rates are low. This is an imperfect solution. I'll make some progress. We have been consistently honest about the difficulties and hard choices that this moment presents. We've heard a lot about the sage advice. The sage minutes themselves say ministers must consider the associated costs in terms of health and well-being and the economic impacts alongside any epidemiological assessment. However, it seems like the only people not prepared to confront this reality are the party opposite, which is surprising, Mr. Speaker, given that just days ago the Shadow Health Secretary said a new national lockdown would be disastrous for society and would cause unimaginable damage to our economy and well-being. I'm happy to take intervention.
His response would have more credibility if he wasn't stood there after month of failure, if he wasn't stood there with a government whose testing and tracing regime and whose entire approach has got us to this point in the first place. We all recognise how expensive this is going to be, but it's happened because of the failure that he and his party have facilitated.
Mr. Speaker, the debate following this will address test and trace. It's worth bearing in mind over £12 billion has invested in our test and trace capacity. The increase in testing capacity has risen from simply 10,000 a day at the start of this crisis to close to 300,000 today, on its way up to 500,000, and, Mr. Speaker, now ranks as one of the most comprehensive testing regimes anywhere in Europe. I'm happy to take an intervention.
Would my honourable friend agree with me that faced between the choice between a national blunt instrument that would wreak enormous economic damage and something that's more finely calibrated, region by region, based on the science, there's no choice to make?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. It is a blunt instrument. It would cause needless damage to parts of our country where virus rates are low. And having spent weeks indulging themselves with political attacks on this government's efforts to protect jobs, they have now flipped, Mr. Speaker, and support a blunt national lockdown. And they won't say how much damage this will do to jobs or livelihoods. They won't say how they plan to support businesses through it, and they don't seem to care about the long-term stability of the public finances. If they did, would hear...
Sorry, Chancellor. Please, I can't hear the Chancellor. No, I want to hear him. and I'm sure the people out there want to hear him. So please, if he's going to give way, the Chancellor's a generous man, he will give way and he'll indicate. But in the meantime, I don't need people shouting. Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And if we did, we would hear from the Honourable Lady opposite about how many jobs Labour's lockdown would cost. I'm happy to give way to the gentleman.
Well, to the generous Chancellor for giving way. Today, the North East Child Poverty Commission said 35% of children in the North East region are living in poverty. As a direct result of Conservative policies, we're going to see that number increase. What's he going to do about those children?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the most vulnerable have been at the forefront of our minds throughout this crisis, which is why, as was published over the summer, it is clear the distributional impact of our interventions has benefited those on the lowest incomes the most. It is there in black and white, a Conservative government making sure the most vulnerable are protected through this crisis. Mr. Speaker, any responsible party of government would acknowledge the economic cost of the blunt national lockdown. The party opposite may say they have a plan, but be under no illusions. A plan blind to the hard choices we face, a plan blind and detached from reality, Mr. Speaker, is no plan at all. I'm happy to take an intervention.
I thank the Chancellor for giving way. In the Liverpool City region, which contains my constituency of Wallasey, there is £40 million of unspent support for business that the Chancellor very generously granted in the first wave of the pandemic. Will he now, today, at that dispatch box, get up and say that given that we are in Tier 3, he will release that £40 million so that the local authorities in the Liverpool City region can apply that money to help their local businesses during the highest level of lockdown which we're suffering at the moment?
Mr. Speaker, I say to the Honourable Lady, I know what a difficult time for her and her constituents this is. With regard to the underspends, and I'll come to this later, I think it's wrong to think of them in that way. What this was is the government giving an advance to local authorities to make payments to businesses. That was done on a basis that every local authority will have a wildly different degree of over or underspend, which we true up at the end of the process. We could equally have asked local authorities to make payments themselves and reimburse them afterwards. But what I would say is that there is significant financial support both for her local authority and the businesses in her area that are closed down. That was announced by the Prime Minister, and I will come on to address that in detail later. And it is right that that support is there. But, Mr. Speaker, let me please reiterate our plan. The House will be well aware of the gravity of our economic situation. The latest figures show our economy grew by 6% in July, 2% in August, but remains almost 10% smaller than it was before coronavirus hit. Business investment suffered a record fall in the second quarter of this year. Consumer sentiment remains well below its long-run average. And despite the significant support we have provided, the data is beginning to reveal the true extent of the damage coronavirus has caused our labour market. The latest statistics published just yesterday show employment falling, unemployment rising, welfare claims rising. And the revisions the ONS have made to their previous estimates show that unemployment was higher than they thought over the summer. Mr. Speaker, I have talked about facing up to the difficult truths clearly, and we are facing an economic emergency. But we are acting on a scale commensurate with this emergency as we address my single biggest priority to protect people's jobs and their livelihoods. We have put in place a comprehensive plan to protect, support and create jobs in every region and nation of the United Kingdom. Through more than £200 billion of support since March, we're protecting more than 9.5 million jobs through the job retention schemes, strengthening our welfare safety net with an extra £9 billion for the lowest paid and most vulnerable, granting more than £13.5 billion to those who are self-employed, with further grants to come, protecting over 1 million small and medium-sized businesses through £100 billion of tax cuts, tax deferrals, direct grants and government-backed loans. Happy to give way.
I'm very grateful. Does he agree that the best way to protect jobs is to keep the economy open wherever possible? Most other nations are using a local restrictions approach to deal with this, including Germany, which is using lockdowns at a district level, not even at a state or county level. Does he agree that's the best way forward?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. The only sustainable way to protect jobs in the long run is to have an economy that is open and functioning. No amount of support can make up for that. But, Mr. Speaker, the other things we have done: eased repayment terms on those loans through Pay As You Grow, delivered on our promise to give the NHS what it needs, backed hundreds of thousands of young people to find good jobs through the Kickstart scheme and new investment in training and apprenticeships, creating green jobs through the £2 billion Green Home Grant programme, showing that we're here for our cultural sector with a Cultural Recovery Fund, a further support package for charities, and investing hundreds of billions of pounds in the largest, most sustained programme of infrastructure investment that the UK has seen in decades. Comprehensive action, Mr. Speaker, to protect the jobs and livelihoods of the British people. And it undermines the credibility of the party opposite that in the face of all of that support, they continue to pretend that insufficient action is being taken. I'm going to make some progress. Mr. Speaker, as the crisis evolves, our economic response will also evolve. What we will see over the winter is a complex picture of some businesses able to open safely and others being ordered to close to control the spread of the virus. So our winter economy plan provides a toolkit to protect jobs and businesses over the difficult weeks and months to come. The plan has three parts. First, the job support scheme will protect jobs in businesses that are open or closed. If businesses can open safely, but with reduced or uncertain demand, the government will directly subsidise people's wages over the winter, giving those employers the option to bring people back to work on shorter hours rather than making them redundant. And we're expanding the job support scheme to give more support to businesses that are ordered to close. For people unable to work for 1 week or more, their employer will still be able to pay them 2/3 of their normal salary, and the UK government will cover the cost. This national programme will benefit people the same, wherever they live and whatever job they do. Happy to give way.
To him for giving way. There seems to me to be a basic dishonesty at the heart of these Tier 2 plans, because there is no support for pubs. Pubs are being told they're allowed to stay open, but the measures being brought in are actually making them unviable. At least with our approach, what you would see is a short-term hit, but then a reduction in the rate and more of a chance for us to return to normality. Will he at least admit that those pubs in Tier 2 areas are not going to have viable businesses, and say something about what he's going to do to support them?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm glad finally some acknowledgement that it will be a hit to businesses and jobs from what the party opposite are suggesting. And it is right, Mr. Speaker, that there is support provided to hospitality, which is why this government has provided a VAT reduction, a business rates holiday, direct cash grants, Eat Out to help out, and now, Mr. Speaker, the job support scheme directly there to support those businesses that are open and operating, but not at the same level that they were previously. And to give those businesses and their employees certainty, rather than the weeks that I heard about from the Honourable Lady opposite, this scheme will run for 6 months through to the spring. This job support scheme is in line with most other European countries, and to support the lowest paid through this crisis, we have also made our welfare system more generous and more responsive too.
Grateful to the Chancellor giving way, and he will know from York's economic base the fact that we may rise to 27% unemployment in our city because of the complexity of our economy. What additional measures will he put in place to build the bridge in order to get us through this really difficult period? Because the job support scheme will just not deliver for my constituents.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'd say to the Honourable Lady the job support scheme was widely welcomed, not just by business groups like the CBI and the FSB, but also by the TUC, who I was happy to work closely with to design the job support scheme. But she is right. that is not the only thing that we will do to support jobs, which is why we have put in place the £2 billion Kickstart scheme to provide fully funded job placements for those young people most affected by this crisis, most at risk of unemployment, and thousands of those young Kickstarters will be starting their new jobs this autumn. I have to give way.
Thank my right honourable friend. Does my right honourable friend agree that whilst we all want simple solutions to this crisis, whether that's the opposition suggesting full lockdown or an unlimited extent to furlough, there are no simple solutions. This is a highly complex problem. Every intervention, every support scheme will be nuanced. It has to be regionally effective. There are no simple solutions. We shouldn't be looking for simple solutions. We should be looking for the right ones.
As ever, my honourable friend is spot on. It is not leadership to shy away from the hard choices and real trade-offs that these decisions take. She is absolutely right. Mr. Speaker, the second part of our winter plan is to support businesses who are legally required to close, and we've heard about this previously. Those businesses will now be able to claim a cash grant of up to £3,000 per month, depending on the value of their property. Those grants can be used for any business costs and will not need to be repaid. I've also guaranteed £1.3 billion of funding to the Scottish, Welsh and Northern Ireland administrations so they can choose to do something similar. The Honourable Lady asked if other areas had received this and was under the impression that none others have. I can correct the facts, Mr. Speaker. Bolton is the only other area that has faced hospitality restrictions in this way, and Bolton Council has received, at last count, I believe, almost £200,000 of support to compensate their businesses as that they have been closed in a similar way. Thirdly, Mr.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I fear the Chancellor is confused. I was not talking about the much-trumpeted local restriction support grant, which he's right, has only been applied so far to that one area of Bolton. I was talking instead about the business support that was delivered to Leicester, Oadby and Wigston, which I believe has not been provided to any other part of the country. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, it's the same type of support provided to the local authority to help and support their businesses. I think that was the question she asked my honourable friend, but I'm happy to answer it. The third part of our plan, Mr. Speaker, is to provide additional funding for local authorities. And again, I'm happy to correct maybe a misunderstanding of the situation for the Honourable Lady. It is not the case that that support is there only for local authorities in Tier 3. There is a scaled structure, so for all local authorities placed into different tiers, they will receive extra financial support on a per capita basis with the funding formula that my honourable friend, the Chief Secretary, is implementing, and that funding will be worth up to almost £500 million on a national basis to support local areas and their local public health teams with their local response, whether that's more enforcement, compliance or contact tracing. And Mr. Speaker, that comes on top of almost £1 billion that my honourable friend the Prime Minister announced that we will provide to all local authorities as we talk to them about their needs over this difficult period to help make sure that they can provide the services they need to, and that itself comes on top of £3.7 billion already provided to local authorities. Mr. Speaker, this government is dealing with the world as it is. Whilst the Honourable Lady may not wish to confront that reality, I don't have that luxury. We can't just let the virus take hold, but nor can we blithely fall into another national spring-style lockdown as the party opposite now want to do, rather than following our regional, tiered and localised approach. We are dealing with a once-in-a-century event, and I can assure members on all sides of this House that the government is doing all it can to support the country through this crisis. We need a balanced approach. We need a consistent approach. And as, Mr. Speaker, you will have seen, we also want a cooperative approach. But any responsible party calling for a shutdown of our entire country should be honest about the potential costs, economic and social, of such a dramatic measure. At the very least, they should have the integrity to acknowledge that what they are proposing will create significant damage to people's lives and livelihoods. I have never said there are easy choices or cost-free answers. This is the reality we face, and it would be dishonest to ignore that truth. So no more political games, Mr. Speaker. and cheap shots from the sidelines. The party opposite can either be part of this solution or part of the problem. Mr. Speaker, it's called leadership, but from them I am not holding my breath.